Okay, we got some breaking news from the NFL world today. So, former Indianapolis Colts head coach, former Eagles offensive coordinator Frank Reich has now been hired by the Carolina Panthers.
Somewhere along those lines. Happy
I like those
Halloween
classics.
Eve.
I like those classics, dude. They're
Tonight's
nice.
gonna be a thriller.
Have I told you I worked at the World Series? It was my first year at the stadium. I went to Fanatics Fest, I went to Comic-Con, and I went to the World Series. It was my first year at the stadium, and the Yankees made it all the way to the World Series. Unfortunately, we lost 5 games to the Dodgers.
I said the Giants will be a perfect fit for John Harbaugh because you already established the quarterback situation. You already established the running back position. You already established the right receiver position, and you have the top 5 pick in the draft.
Todd Bowles, at best, is a mediocre coach. He did the same situation with the Jets back in 2015, ultimately maliciously ruining a power-hungry Baker Mayfield and potentially Mike Evans.
But Indianapolis ultimately came back, got the go-ahead touchdown. Then, at the end of the game, when Brady got the ball less than a minute, Peyton had his head down the entire time because he knew Brady had enough time. But the interception happened. It's funny. All of a sudden, Peyton Manning hears the crowd roaring. He finally looks up and starts jumping up and down real. Good evening, folks. Welcome to episode 2 of Everything on the Table with Agent Warrior X. And it is a special episode because today we have a special birthday on the show. Floor is yours.
Yes, ladies and gentlemen, tomorrow is February 18th, 2026. But today is one day before my birthday, February 17th, 2026. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to episode 2 of NFL of Everything on the Table. I am your co-host, Agent Warrior X, and you can see I have a different background because tomorrow is my birthday. I am officially going to be 26 years old, and I want to say shout out to Sarah Chan VA. I want to say shout out to the Hardcore Sports Network, to my Big Blue Wrecking Crew Giant fans, to my diehard Yankee fans, to my diehard um, Nets fans, and most importantly, thank you all for this opportunity, including Nikki Steez and Mitch and everyone on the network, for having me this wonderful opportunity as my next step. Well, I want to say to you guys in return, thank you. It's going to be a very special for me tomorrow. My birthday special is going to be uploaded tomorrow, if not probably the day after tomorrow. But I want to say that after 25 years in life, I have officially wanted to say thank you. If it wasn't for all of you, I would have never been the same person as it once do. I sacrificed my life, my pride, my joy for this. And that's exactly why Nikki and we love to talk about NFL pickups every start of the football season. We love the Eagles, we love the Giants. But I'm going to say this from the bottom of my heart. I love you all and thank you. Nikki, you can come back in.
And going into this one, we're fresh off the NBA All-Star break, which had its moments. It had its cool moments. For me as a Sixers fan, BJ Edgecombe winning the Rising Stars Challenge was fun. The three-point shootout, while I didn't necessarily agree with Dame being in it because he didn't play a game, I give him props. He went out there and showed he can still hoop, and that when he does return, he can still hit the three-point shot. So congrats to Dame Lillard on beating out Devin Booker in that one. The slam dunk contest, congratulations to Keyshawn Johnson, if I'm pronouncing that right. But at the same time, the dunk contest of all of them is the most interesting discussion because it's kind of lost its luster a little bit. I stated my reasons why. I'll reiterate them, and then when you want to jump in, go right ahead. I think two reasons. You don't really get stars in the contest anymore. You had Michael Jordan, Dominique Wilkins in there at one point. Vince Carter in 2000 had probably the greatest, or arguably the second greatest individual performance in the dunk contest. With Kenny the Jet
What
Smith,
about
and it's over.
What about Blake Griffin?
I
That
mean,
over
you
the
had
car dunk. You
what
forgot
you had
about
Blake
Dwight Howard. You forgot Dwight Howard. You forgot Blake Griffin.
you've had all stars throughout the past, but in recent years, you don't really get stars. I mean, Mac McClung's at his highlight reel dunks, but if you take that away, what do people know him for? I mean, and secondly, a lot of the dunks, while they're still impressive, they're not easy to do. They don't have the same visual effect because we've seen them before. We've seen the between the legs, taken off from the free throw line. They're still impressive. They're not easy, but visually, they don't have the same appeal because we've seen it plenty of times before.
You know, if I had a good memory of the NBA All Star game, it would. Before that, I'm going to say that for the Rising Stars, VJ Emscombe still got it in him. And I think Yegor Devin, if you've seen his games recently with Yegor Devin, he has been amazing. And I think a lot of people laughed at the Nets for taking him over um Walter Clayton Jr. or Derek Queen. As I look at it even further, Diego Demon has developed really well alongside Nolan Traore. Nolan Traore has been doing amazing since Michael Porter Jr. came for that trade with Denver. You know what trade I'm talking about.
Exactly.
Even if the Nuggets self-proclaimed won the trade, if you look at it even further, as far as I'm concerned, when it comes to entering the second half season, he looked terrible and he's hurt.
It's one of those scenarios where short term, it's really hard to say who really won the trade in the long term. Like, perfect example, historical, the Carmelo Anthony trade to the Knicks. In the short term, the Knicks won. But when you look back in the long term, the Denver Nuggets were the long-term winner of that trade. That Nets-Nuggets trade still remains to be determined as far as who the long-term winner is. But for the Nets, there is an opportunity for the future, team-wise, to get better because Bulls are going full-blown tank. That opens a spot if a year or two down the line for the play-in tournament. Eventually, the Heat, they haven't had a lot of luck lately. You got to wonder if Riles is starting to lose it as an executive, and they might start to collapse in a few years. That opens up the door. The Pacers, Cavs in a few years, you got to wonder where they're going to be because James Harden's only temporary. Is Donovan Mitchell still going to be that dude? I mean, there's a lot of question marks down the future. Joel Embiid, what will be his future?
You know what I think about centers even further? You did not mention the Nets' future because you mentioned earlier that in terms of a long-term trade, you remember that Mikal Bridges trade they did with the Knicks and Nets? I think the Nets won long-term because they want to develop like future prospects. Like Diego Demit was one of them. Nolan Traore, Ben Saroff, in my opinion, should be like developing even further. And I think Danny Wolf would be an amazing power forward for years to come if he's developed properly. But I think for the Brooklyn Nets, they should definitely try to continue the tank even further for the second half. But I think but I think this is where I'm going to be wrong because recently Adam Silver just said this on a rumor saying about tanking being out instead of having the rookie draft class as free agents. In what sports world would you have a draft class becoming free agents? I think, in my opinion, this is a bad idea because the draft lotteries could be potentially out the window. The expansion teams could happen sooner than later with the Seattle and Las Vegas. And on top of all off, I do not think Adam Silver should pull the trigger and say rookie draft class should be free agents. So I'm going to say no for this one because Adam Silver may have committed the most dumbest thing I will ever seen as a Brooklyn Nets fan. Yes, you may have said the super team in 2021 would be amazing compared to the Sixers, but I don't think so. It was a short term win for the Nets and a long term win for the Rockets. and the Thunder, hypothetically.
But time will tell on that one for sure. And as far as like I said, but we were talking about the dunk contest. The biggest thing is you could have some stars in there. You could easily have done two guys that could have been at least star power wise. Zion Williamson, who has a name and when he's healthy can deliver, and Ja Morant. And then two younger guys. That would be a perfect formula to try to get someone like if Shaden Sharp was healthy or Johnson, who ended up winning the contest. That would be a nice way to mix some name guys with name recognition and some guys that have the opportunity to shine competing against the Ja Morant or Zion Williamson. That would actually be a nice little format. At least get a few newer guys that have a chance to get a highlight reel play, but also get a few names that the fans recognize to get more viewers locked in. That would.
I'm going to put it this way and say for star power wise, for the MVP, I think it's going to be close between two players. SGA for the Oklahoma City Thunder and potentially Victor Wembanyama if he continues to ball out and stay healthy. For Rookie of the Year, now that the second half is going to be underway in the next couple of days, I'm going to say for Rookie of the Year is going to be close between VJ and Cooper Flag. I think that trade with Los Angeles really was by far the worst trade they could ever do in sports history. Whatever you think of worst sports trades for in terms of basketball, they're gonna go down there with a few trades such as Babe Ruth to the Yankees, Cliff, Kane Liffin to LSU, and of course that trade with Chicago with the Panthers. You know what trade I'm talking about.
Yep. Yeah.
Speaking of football, we heard about the Dolphins releasing not one, not two, but three players potentially. Tyreek Hill's out of the Dolphins, and Bradley Chubb is now officially out of the Dolphins. I think for Tyreek Hill, I got my top three teams fitting for best fits Tyreek Hill. Number 3, the New York Giants. John Harbaugh, with now Matt Nagy on that team, I could potentially see as a reunion, but not by a long shot. If Tyreek Hill can stay healthy and not cause a lot of drama and compare Malik Neighbors, I could see this as a really good receiving core if they decided to resign Cordell Flott, Wandale Robinson, and Jermaine Luminor. Number 2, the Denver Broncos. Denver needs another receiving core aside from Cortland Sutton. You already have a good quarterback of Bo Nix. You already have a monster defense in Nick Benito, and you have a great offense the years to come with Evan Ingram. And number 1, the number 1 pick is a not obvious Kansas City Chiefs. Could I see a reunion with Patrick Mahomes? No. Maybe, but if he stays healthy, yes. If Travis Kelce can stay healthy, yes. But I don't know if that's going to turn out with Xavier Worthy. If you have any opinions, let me know.
I could see team-wise some additional teams. Realistically, this was mentioned in a comment on the 3-point blitz. The Bills to give Josh Allen that top target because you already have a regular season winning culture established in Buffalo. You need to just that extra, whatever it is you need, that extra player, that extra something to get over the hump come playoff time, or maybe the Baltimore Ravens to give Lamar a true top wideout. So there are some possible realistic options. I saw someone propose the Eagles, but I would pass on that because you already got the AJ
If you think
Brown.
if you think Baltimore is going to end up with Tyreek Hill, I possibly think not by a long shot because you already Zay Flowers needs to improve instead of dropping passes. Isaiah likely might be entering free agency sooner than later because they signed Mike Andrews long term. And to top all off, Derrick Henry is pretty much wasting his prime years with the Ravens. With Jesse Minter now on that team, I don't see that happening. But I think Tyreek Hill's final destination should definitely be the Buffalo Bills. Can you imagine if Tyreek Hill signs with the Bills just to piss off Dolphin fans? I wouldn't.
But yeah, some that could be kind of that you just need that one extra player, kind of like what the Eagles did when they brought in Terrell Owens. They had lost 3 straight conference championships. They needed that one extra player that could help them. And Terrell Owens, I mean, he gave them on a leg and a half the best shot possible in that Super Bowl, and he played a key role in keeping them in that game. So it's possible something similar could happen. That would be the top destination as of now, but we got to wait and see. The thing is with Hill, though, the locker room drama is going to chase some teams away. But for the Dolphins, though, I get the Tyreek Hill departure. I get it. But you're getting rid of basically all your main players now, or some
I'm
of your
starting
main
to see
guys?
like a culture change. I'm assuming Tua. They should have never paid Tua Tagovailoa that contract. I'm gonna keep it a buck with you. It's that we understand Tua is another good quarterback from Alabama, but ultimately over time, since those playoff days with Mike McDaniels, it hasn't been the same since. Tua's getting concussed multiple times. Tyreek Hill has been slowly declining, and Jalen Waddle, I'm hearing just recently, could potentially enter a trade, be a trade candidate. But you know, it's also a trade candidate as well. Not AJ Brown, Kayvon Thibodeau. Kayvon Thibodeau could enter the trade conversation as well. But I think Kayvon Thibodeau should definitely best fit. If I had to choose one team that should definitely best fit for the teams like Kayvon Thibodeau, Baltimore. Baltimore needs another edge rusher. They need some help on the defensive on the front defensive end. But I think I want to see how that plays out for the opening offseason come next month.
Yep, but it's definitely going to be interesting, though. But the Dolphins, it's hard to give them the benefit of the doubt because they butchered pretty much not just this. I mean, go back past this decade, but this decade alone, they butchered a lot of transactions and a lot of potential upside with some of their head coach decisions, like firing Brian Flores, the way they handled Tua's concussions, and they hurt themselves big time in the long term. The way they
Hey,
handled bringing in Jalen Ramsey, so on and so forth. It's hard to give the Dolphins the benefit of the doubt until we actually see them improve.
I'm going to put it this way and say that the Dolphins are comparable to the Minnesota Twins. And I'm gonna tell you why. This is compared to what happened to the Twins last year, last season. Come the 2025 deadline, Judgment Day arrived for the Polans. They got rid of 11 of 26 key players on that team. They got rid of Harrison Bader. They got rid of Carlos Correa. They got they got rid of Johan Duran to the Philadelphia Phillies. And they let go of some of the key players. The only players that they have left is Pablo Lopez. They have Byron Buxton left on that team. Edward Julian, who is a DFA candidate, and worst case scenario, a few utilities. And James Outman, I think, in my opinion, should definitely be a DFA candidate if he doesn't continue to stay consistent. But I think, in my opinion, the Dolphins, this was the Dolphins' year, all right, in terms of development. It started with promise, it ends with death. The Bills and Jets will piss on their graves like they always do.
Yep. And I will say this there's one more thing I wanted to say about All Star Weekend. I actually like the idea of doing a USA in the world involvement in some way, shape, or form. And I noticed the stars on that Team USA stars, the young players, Anthony Edwards, SGA, Tyrese Maxey, those guys, Aaron Fox, they played like they were hungry. They were motivated, particularly against the veterans like the LeBrons and the KDs. This was in the Hardens. They're like, nah, this is our time to knock them off. Let's make a name for ourselves. And they did that. And even you saw versus the world, versus the Wembys, the Jokic's, the Lucas, both teams played hard and were giving it all, their all. And they produced a fun little mini game. So that
I
concept was
I
better.
kid you not. When it comes to young players that are hungry, you think of young players. If you want to compare that young, hungry, young, power hungry team like you mentioned with Tyrese Maxey, um, I'm gonna compare that Tyrese Maxey into Allen Iverson. Don't get me wrong. I love Iverson as a kid, and to tell you the truth, I used to be a Sixer fan. I love the Sixers because Iverson was my idol. I had his cornrows almost every day when I was younger. I used to wear his headband, and I used to wear street clothes sometimes when I'm heading to school. Because Allen Iverson was one of my few great idols I grew up watching alongside the New York Knicks and the New Jersey Nets when they were in New Jersey. But that era when Jason Kidd, Vince Carter, and Jefferson arrived, that's why I became a fan. Don't get me wrong. I love Iverson, but over time, when Iverson went to another team, I said, you know what? I'd rather stick to the New Jersey Nets because the Nets back then in the early 2000s was the by far the best era we have ever seen since the Bulls in the 90s, or better yet, the rivalry between the Lakers and Celtics in the 80s. I'm going to compare that back-to-back championship team to the specifically the Bulls in the early 90s before the repeat, the early 90s and the late 90s.
And as far as Jason Kidd goes, I'll say this. Jason Kidd was certainly the best point guard of the 2000s. And speaking of best point guards of all time, late last week, Chris Paul, one of the top 5 point guards of all time, my number 5, announced his retirement from the NBA, having 12 All-Stars, 11 All-NBAs, a Rookie of the Year, and an All-Star Game MVP to his resume. Plus, his jersey retired at Wake Forest.
You know what else? A finals appearance in 2021. I wish the Suns would win a championship so that way that can add that to a resume. He's going to go down there with a few players that never won a championship, like Barry Bonds, Don Mattingly. You can add that too. Don Mattingly, Barry Bonds, Chris Paul, who never won, great players who never won a championship.
Dan
Matt
Marino.
Ryan, him too. Matt Ryan. Matt Ryan never won a championship. I think, in my opinion, you can name every player, whether it's from football to baseball or football, who never won a champ, who was great players that never won a championship.
Yep, and Chris Paul, but he had that effect everywhere he went. He made his teams better for a long time. First, at the time New Orleans Hornets, now New Orleans Pelicans. And funny how the first 2 seasons he was there, they were the OKC Hornets when they had to relocate due to Hurricane Katrina, which had a domino effect on the league because they did well with ticket sales there. And then that paved the way for OKC to get its own team a few years later. So, but late 2000s, early 2010s, numerous playoff appearances by New Orleans. Then he goes to the Clippers. First time in franchise history, the Los Angeles Clippers were truly relevant. Then the Rockets, one of the biggest what could have been had he not gotten hurt against the Warriors. Then he does have a season with the Thunder as part of the Russell Westbrook trade. Their contracts respectively were included. But he does lead the team to the playoffs. And players like SJ, I'm sure, learned a lot from him. But then he goes to the Suns, who hadn't been to the playoffs in over a decade. And what happens his first year there? They make a run to the finals.
In my opinion, if Kevin Durant never had his toe on the line, it would have been a completely different story. Because the Nets hasn't made it to the Eastern Conference Finals since 2003. The Sixers hasn't made it to the Eastern Conference Finals since 2001 before 9/11. Now, if you want to talk about championship memories, whatever you think of best memories for the Eastern Conference Finals, Western Conference Finals, I can think the best one. No, it's not the Raptors and Sixers. It would have to be the Nets versus the Pistons. That was by far the biggest rivalry, in my opinion. You have Ben Wallace. You have Kenyon Martin. You have Big Ben Wallace. You had Grant Hill. You have a lot. You have
Chauncey
a lot
Billups.
of. Thank you, Chauncey Billups,
Jason Kidd,
Richard Jefferson, Kerry Kittles, Keith Van Horn. You could name every player on that Nets team back in the early 2000s. But that rivalry between the Pistons and the Nets in the Eastern Conference Finals in 2004, that was by far the best rivalry, in my opinion.
Oh, yeah, and it's been funny because you think of playoff rivalries, there were a lot of good ones over the years, too. Like, you could look, of course, Lakers Celtics is the most iconic. numerous finals appearances in completely different eras of the NBA. You had Heat and Knicks in the late 90s. That was the most intense rivalry with Patrick Ewing, Larry Johnson, Charles Oakley going against Alonzo Mourning. Tim Hardaway Sr. and company. And then you are Lakers Spurs throughout the 2000s. Kobe.
I kid you not. Between the Lakers and Spurs in the early 2000s,
and that went on to the late 2000s with Kobe and Powell too. So that's why I consider Kobe the main factor for the Lakers throughout that entire playoff rivalry. Because even after Shaq, Powell comes in, they rekindled the rivalry.
I think, in my opinion, the early 2000s, the early 2000s Western Conference belongs to the Lakers because besides Kobe, besides Shaq, besides Derek Fisher, despite all those players, including Chalu, who won a championship with the Lakers, that Lakers team in the early 2000s between them and San Antonio with Greg Popovich, Tim Duncan, Tony Parker, that was by far the best Western Conference playoff rivalry in recent memory. You could also add the Nets and Sixers, not the recent one, but like the early ones.
Right, and then you go back before that. You have Bulls and Knicks, Jordan versus Ewing. Actually, matter of fact, there was kind of like a four-way rivalry going in the 90s. In the mid to late 90s, it was the Heat, Knicks, Pacers, and Bulls. In some way, shape, or form, those teams clashed in the playoffs at least once per playoff. That's what made that so much fun. And then I'm trying to think. I mean, that Eastern Conference 90s, Bulls, Pistons.
Thank you. I was going to think Bulls, Pistons, but I think Reggie Miller, Patrick Ewing, Michael Jordan, Patrick Ewing. I can name every single player on that. I can name a few players on that playoff team. Between those two, I'm going to say the best one has to be the Knicks and Pacers. Not the recent one, but like the 90s one. The 90s one with Reggie Miller was by far the best one. And that recent memory where the Pacers beat the Knicks, this is official property of the Indiana Pacers.
Oh, my God. Yep.
And yeah. Yes. They can't even escape the Tyrese Halliburton and the Reggie Miller memes.
Oh, yeah. That's going to live on. And it doesn't. Now, come next year, when the Pacers are healthy, maybe we'll get another matchup. Obviously, this year, that's not going to happen, but who knows? It'll be interesting. Maybe potentially there's a Pistons-Knicks matchup with the Pistons coming back to form as a true top contender. And remember, this would be the second straight year we saw those teams in the playoffs because they were in the opening round last year. Pistons still took the series of 6 and gave an respectable effort for a bunch of guys first go in the playoffs.
To tell you the truth, the Pistons should have won that game on that one specific game, to tell you the truth. I think he was pretty much good on that three-point range with Cade Cunningham took that shot or someone else took that shot. The Pistons should have won that game. Pistons would have won that game.
But now we just got to wait and see what happens. And it's funny we're talking about memorable playoff rivalries. And here's another one. Of course, Kings-Lakers of the early 2000s. Obviously, the Lakers had their number, but it was certainly an interesting series that saw numerous clashes. Even The Rock one time said, "I'll be sure to come back to Sacramento when the Lakers beat the Kings in May."
Speaking of, you talk about The Rock, right?
Yeah.
Speaking of wrestling, now I want to talk about something related to wrestling because I know for a fact that I know Bitch and Pyro saw Monday Night Raw last night because we saw what happened with Liv Morgan interview with Michael Cole. Ultimately, the women's world champion Stephanie Valkyrie had to talk to her in Spanish while Dominic Mysterio had to translate for her. Ultimately, at the very end, she made Liv Morgan cry. In my perspective, this is one of those road to WrestleManias. This is one of those road to WrestleManias we will see when it comes to men's winning the Royal Rumble or women's winning the Royal Rumble. This is one of those road to WrestleMania you have to choose one. Because I already know Roman Reigns chose CM Punk. Because I already know he chose CM Punk for one good reason. He never won a world heavyweight championship in his career. He won the U.S. championship. He won the Intercontinental championship. He won the tag team championship with the Shield. He won. He won the And he won the WWE championship. And he won the Universal championship. But never in his career he never won the world heavyweight championship.
We'll see if that plays up. But it's interesting. Now we're getting closer to March Madness time, and it's kind of interesting what happened. Apparently, a few days ago, there was a game with the South Carolina's women's team that did pretty good numbers. And we've seen this trend in recent years where sometimes the women's games actually outdo the men's games on certain nights, TV ratings wise. Now, I've never watched a full game, but when I see, like if I'm at work or I'm out somewhere and I see them showing if the game's on, I'll glance at it and see what's going on. But the one thing I've noticed is when I do glance at their games, the women's games sometimes are more physical than the men's games. Like there's more of that defensive mentality that we see there. And that's probably part of the reason it's getting more popular. Another reason why is because a lot of with the men's, they're one and done. They do their 1 year, go to the NBA. Whereas like with Caitlin Clark, Angel Reese, they actually stuck around for a few years, giving the fans more time to get familiar with them.
You know, speaking of March Madness, you're right about one thing when it comes to women's. They're outplaying the men's college basketball in terms of TV ratings. But what you did not mention is power rankings, which is why the next one I'm going to mention is power rankings. For this year, this is the top 10 teams that are part of the top 10 of the college basketball. For number 10, I'm going to say Michigan State Spartans because Michigan State, that's my college, by the way, the Spartans, because Michigan State has been balling out but losing in crucial moments. But in perspective, if they can improve a lot better and heading into March Madness, one of the biggest college basketball tournaments of the year, I think they can outlast Kansas and that's a big if Derek Peterson continues to stay healthy. Number 9, I got the Kansas Jayhawks. Again, if Derek Peterson stays healthy, this could potentially be part of the power rankings in terms of the offense and the defense. Number 8, I'm going to say the Tennessee Volunteers. Tennessee, in my opinion, deserves to be in that spot because the fact that they're trying to outlast almost every team, but it's going to be close come then. Number 7, I'm going to say BYU Cougars, and I'll tell you why. I'm not biased. AJ Dabenta. Have you been seeing his games recently with him? Because if you did, he
I'll
has
have to
been
check
balling
it
out
out.
recently. I'm going to think that we're going to have to talk about the NBA draft sooner than later on the show when March comes. Because in my opinion, AJ Dabenta is ranked the top 3 best rookie draft class of the 2026. Now, for the number 1 is the obvious. Duke. Duke is a juggernaut. Duke's Blue Devils are juggernauts every single year when it comes to college basketball. You can think of every player that came out of that college. You think of Kyrie Irving. You think of Zion Williamson. You think of Cooper Flagg, Cameron Boozer, who's coming out this year. But I think if Duke can continue the dominance, they got a shot to win it all. Oh, and we're losing to the UCLA Bruins. Great, but it's the beginning of the game, though.
Yep, but time will ultimately tell how it plays out. And we know it's always interesting. Those March Madness pools. Because trust me, the first week, there's always some upset that happens that affects somebody's pool early. Every single year in every single pool. So that's always the fun part about March Madness, finding out who's going to shock the country this year.
If I had to choose the best memories for March Madness, we're going to talk about March Madness all of March all of March on everything on the table. Because if you want to talk about best memories when it comes to college basketball, you think of Syracuse with Carmelo Anthony in the Final Four. Ultimately, they either won or lost. The second one I'm going to say, Villanova. These are honorable mentions. Villanova, that 2015-2016 season, that was by far the best season Mikael Bridges, Jalen Brunson had that year.
And you want to talk about Carmelo? Look, that's the greatest one and done in March Madness history right there. He went out there, won that national championship at Syracuse, improved his draft stock. Now, for whatever reason, the Pistons didn't want him, which in the long term turned out to be a mistake because they won a championship in spite of Darko Milicic, but couldn't duplicate. With Carmelo Anthony, you're talking an entirely different story for the NBA in the mid to late 2000s. But hey, Carmelo went to Denver and hey, he had that nice little run there. Some people say he should have got Rookie of the Year over LeBron, but that's a discussion for another time. But definitely the greatest one and done. Just went out there, dominated, and was ready for the NBA. Another one, Derrick Rose at Memphis, had an excellent one and done. And then the Chicago Bulls got the number one pick. Just played out a little perfectly, and he got to go near his hometown area.
In Chicago.
Yep.
And by the way, speaking of sports, this is one thing that I don't like mentioning on certain shows, because I did see the match with Real Madrid versus Benfica a couple of hours ago, and yes, I already know Real Madrid won that game against Benfica, but after Vinicius Junior's goal, there was some racial comments after he celebrated his goal. And I think that Argentinian defender should have been sent off. There is no room for racism at all. Throughout his career, I think Vinicius Jr. might be the most overhated Real Madrid player of this 2020s. Yes, he won multiple Champions Leagues and La Ligas with Real Madrid, but I think he is the most overhated player in the league, which I think I would stand with him and say there was no room for racism when it comes to sports. And it's been ongoing since the early 2020s, and it's been going on till this day, which I think, in my opinion, Vinicius Jr., you deserve better. I do not care what anybody says when it comes to, oh, Vinicius Jr. is not that guy. I'm going to keep it a buck with you. Vinicius Jr. is that guy, and Vinicius Jr. is the best winger in Brazil. Yes, Neymar is running out of time in terms of his prime days, but those days are over. Hand it down to the new generation of Endrick, Vinicius Jr., and Rodrigo. But there's no room for racism, which is why I'm going to stand with Vinicius Jr. Say enough with racism and enough with the racial comments after celebrating a goal.
And we still see it even in mainstream sports, but most notably, especially now in social media era, we see it most from fans. That's been the biggest problem. Particularly Boston fans seem to have a knack for this. We know,
what, to tell you the truth, New York and Boston has the most heated rivalries in the country. Rather it's the Celtics and the Knicks. You could think of that. You could think of the Yankees and the Red Sox. You could think of that, especially that comeback in 2004 after that ALCS game, when they were led 3-1. I can also think the Giants and the Patriots. Yes, that Giants and Patriots Super Bowl 2 times, 2007 and 2011, with that helmet catch and that Manningham catch. But statistically, that 2011 season, you could say that the Giants were the worst team in the 2011. That was a literal tank division where the Eagles and Commanders were terrible that year.
I mean, fortunately, more people are aware of it, but it's got to stop, period. From whether it be the players, in some cases, even some players pretty much got themselves barred for it. Like, remember Myers Leonard, the former basketball player? he pretty much got himself barred from the NBA indirectly for a comment he made. He got cut. Nobody signed him after that.
Exactly. Which is why I'm gonna keep it short and sweet. So before we move on to the next comment, is this the only thing that's stronger than hate is love. And that's exactly why I'm gonna keep it that way. Next topic. The next thing I want to talk about is the upcoming NFL draft. Now, I'm gonna keep it short and sweet because I know I think one of the coaches in the comments said that pieces and blessings, gentlemen, if you could show that right here. And I think, in my opinion, he's gonna do the NFL draft on Thursday. And I know what's gonna happen. So I'm gonna keep my top five. Here are my five players that is going to be part of this team. Number one, I already know, Fernando Mendoza. Fernando Mendoza, after that massive underdog run with the Hoosiers going back to the national championship for the first time in their national championship history in football. But I think Fernando Mendoza, in my opinion, should definitely be the next Matt Ryan. If that next Matt Ryan wins the championship, he will simply outplay him. Number two, the Tennessee Titans. The New York Jets. Sorry. Number two, the New York Jets will select Arvell Reese from Ohio State. And I'm gonna keep it a buck with you. I would be shocked if they take a quarterback at number two, because Arvell Reese is a really good linebacker edge rusher from Ohio State. Whenever you think of edge rushers who came out of that draft from certain colleges like Ohio State, Miami, or Penn State, you think of Arvell Reese, Micah Parsons, Abdul Carter, etc. But ultimately, I think Arvell Reese will be a good candidate. Tennessee Titans. Tennessee Titans will select Ruben Bain from Miami. Ruben Bain is an excellent defender for the Hurricanes. And I say that the Titans lacked the front defense and they sometimes lack the secondary, which is why I'm going to say that Ruben Bain will be my third pick for the NFL draft for the Tennessee Titans. For the fourth pick, the Arizona Cardinals, they're going to have to select a running back, Jeremiah Love. I think they lack a running back, and they still have a quarterback, probably Kyler Murray, but I don't think so, because Jeremiah Love, in my opinion, should definitely be part of that. And number five, the New York Giants. No, I'm not going to pick Cardell Tate, unfortunately. The number fifth pick, Caleb Downs. Have you seen John Harbaugh's interview recently about Caleb Downs being mentioned? If John Harbaugh makes the right pieces in terms of the secondary or protect Dart, you have two options in coming to the offseason. You either improve the secondary with Brian Burns, Abdul Carter, and Dexter Lawrence, or you get Dart some protection, which I think it will be hard for the Giants to pass up on Caleb Downs, because I think, in my opinion, he's a generational player. And that's my top five NFL draft, my draft of this year.
Well, for this year, we all know who's number one. It's Fernando Mendoza from Indiana. No ifs, ands, or buts. Now, with the Jets having the number two pick, here's what you can do. Take the early picks, build up that defense. Maybe hope you land a gem in the later rounds, kind of like the Niners did with Brock Purdy, but that's not guaranteed. But it's hard to really find, outside of Fernando Mendoza, a true must-grab quarterback this year. But maybe, you luck your way into one if you build the rest of your roster right. Sometimes that works. Maybe you got to go defensive for the Jets. You either go Arvell Reese or try to improve that secondary and maybe make a steal with a Caleb Downs, or get David Bailey, the edge out of Texas Tech. But you got to get a guy on defense to help. No interceptions in the season. You traded away your best defensive players. You got to get somebody. And for the Cardinals, I could see them going O-line because you realize, yeah, Kyler Murray wasn't the biggest problem necessarily. There were other problems. And considering Murray got injured, you need an offensive lineman to at least protect your quarterback. Go get out of Miami, get Francis Mogua, if I'm pronouncing that correct.
Francis Muaga.
Go get him. Get yourself an offensive lineman to protect your quarterback because you need it. And then you're hoping that maybe with a new coach might help install some discipline in Kyler Murray, but that remains to be determined. For the Titans, you really got to go for probably the best player on the board, period. You need help all around your team. If that's an edge, if that's a safety, if that's an offensive lineman or running back, you just go for someone, whether that be a Spencer Fano, Carnell Tate, the wide receiver, whether that be
Jordan Tyson,
David Bailey, anybody, the best player available, get them because you need help all around your team, period.
I will be shocked if Tennessee takes Caleb Downs, because if they do, we have no choice but to take a receiver then.
Yep, but also in the Giants, it looks like they're going in the Caleb Downs direction, assuming someone doesn't steal them, because that's where all signs are indicated to. But we got to remember, this is still pre-free agency. We got to see what happens during free agency, who ends up getting who has what void to fill. We still got time to figure that one out, though.
Now, if you want to talk about drafting memories, I'll give you a few drafting memories for the NFL. Last year, we had the Jacksonville Jaguars traded up to get Travis Hunter. Look how that turned out. It turned out well for the Jaguars. Ultimately, he was out for the year, and they made it to the playoffs. Look at the New York Giants last year. They drafted Abdul Carter. Before Brian Dable was terminated, he convinced Joe Shane to make a trade with the Texans. The 25th pick belongs to Jackson Dart to the New York Giants. And I think if you saw his pre-draft before he was drafted to the Giants, he was amazing on the Giants.
But now that brings into another discussion, was the ball the scapegoat for the on-the-field results? I mean, he did so far. It looks like they made some of the right picks with him during his final draft. But speaking of draft memories, this is the most interesting one of the 21st century. If you said think in 2004, you guessed it. Eli Manning gets drafted by the Chargers. But there was all the rumors he didn't want to go there. His agent thought it was a bad idea. Then the Giants draft Phillip Rivers to swap picks. Ben Roethlisberger falls to the Steelers, which I'll say this. When it comes to Eli and Big Ben, it actually worked out best in the long term for both. I think if it had gone the way it was initially projected, Eli got the bag from the Chargers, Drew Brees walked and went and resurrected his career either with the Dolphins or someone like that. Or now Big Ben with the Giants would have been great in the short term, but in the long term, his off-the-field life, living in that New York area where a lot more bars and nightclubs available, would have caused some long-term trouble. So I think in the grand scheme of things, Pittsburgh was the better spot for him. And Eli, let's be real, I think the Giants was the perfect fit for him. I don't think the Chargers would have been as well a fit. So it worked out better in the long term in that regard.
I think the long-term winner would have to be the Giants on that trade with the Chargers. Keep in mind, Phillip Rivers may have been the best quarterback for when we drafted him, but the Chargers refused to say that, no, we're drafting Eli to become the better team. But ultimately, it worked out short term for the Chargers because Dean Spanos continuously thinks that drafting players where that specific player said no to that team, drafted him anyway, and they traded him to the Giants. And that Giants long-term worked out perfectly. You mentioned Big Ben. You said Big Ben, what if scenario on the Giants would have caused them a lot more trouble short-term, which I agree with. Pittsburgh was a better fit. it worked out long term for both teams with the Steelers and Giants. However, Big Ben only won one championship. Eli Manning won two in that 2024 draft class. And Aaron Rodgers, how many?
But that
One.
was that 2005. That was another famous one because at the time, a lot of people thought Rodgers was the better quarterback because he came to Aaron Rodgers from Cal, Alex Smith from Utah. Smith went number one. You figured, okay, maybe Rodgers would go to Tampa Bay, who needed a quarterback at the time. And it seemed like Gruden was interested in it, but they backed out, went with Cadillac Williams. You thought maybe the Cowboys, who needed a QB at the time. But you thought maybe with Bledsoe, who was signed a month before, he would be the mentor to Rodgers, maybe. Well, that didn't happen. He fell all the way to the Packers, which apparently one of the executives for the Packers in an interview, he remembers as soon as the pick was made, his phone rings. It was Brett Favre's agent. But that actually worked out better in the long term for the Packers.
Now, if you want to talk about most hilarious drafts, I'm going to say the number one hilarious draft has to be the New York Jets, specifically the 1980s NFL draft. They missed out on one specific quarterback. They took one quarterback from the 80s, I forgot what his name is, and they passed up on Dan Marino. In the 90s, they wanted Warren Sapp in 95. Look how that turned out. They drafted a tight end from Michigan. Look at the late 2000s. Mark Sanchez to the Jets. It worked out short term. Over time, he sucked. Which is why the Jets are the kings of draft botchers. Because the draft for them has been historically bad. The draft for the New York Jets has been historically bad. The Giants, however, if you want to think of one or two worst draft picks that Giants did, I'm going to say Daniel Jones. Daniel Jones for the Duke Blue Devils, and I'm going to say Kadarius Toney for the Florida Gators. Florida is notorious for college football, and I'll tell you why. The only player that stand out for the Florida Gators was Tim Tebow. Nobody else. Anthony Richardson is terrible. Kadarius Toney was terrible. Every single Florida Gator that they was drafted in, terrible. Not one good player out of that has been good. Now, if you want to talk about best drafting, you think of Donovan McNabb, 1999 for the Philadelphia Eagles. The Browns passed up on Donovan McNabb over Tim Couch.
The Browns.
The Browns are the king of passing up on quarterbacks, and they still have a quarterback problem till this day, ever since Tim Couch was terrible. Johnny Football was terrible. Brady Quinn was terrible. Did I also mention the only quarterback that panned out was Baker Mayfield? That was the only quarterback they panned out.
And they still screw that up in the long term by
And
playing him when he had an injury to his non-throwing shoulder.
Exactly. And look how the Philadelphia Eagles turned out with Donovan McNabb. Don't get me wrong. I like Donovan McNabb because he came from Syracuse. But Donovan McNabb, while Andy Reid was coaching that team, amazing. You still had your best players. You still got the best O-line. You still got the best defense. In that early 2000s, y'all ruled the early 2000s because the defense and the offense was juggernauts.
But in terms of mistakes, I will say this. Wide receivers where they made some of their mistakes, particularly 2001, they drafted Freddie Mitchell when they could have gone for either Reggie Wayne or Chad Johnson. That was a mistake. 2020, Jalen Reagor over Justin Jefferson. Mistake.
I think that was a 2021 draft class, I think.
Now, fortunately, Reagor, they were able to justify by trading him or releasing him when they got AJ Brown, and that to some extent makes up for it. When you see what happened in AJ Brown's first 3 seasons with the Eagles.
And over time, since then, he's been causing a lot of drama over time.
But
And
yeah,
speaking
every
of the
team has
Giants'
their
best
good
draft,
and bad picks. Some teams far more bad than good, like the Browns, the Jets, the Raiders of recent memory.
oh boy, could I ever think of that one specific quarterback of Jamarcus Russell?
Oh my gosh.
I think, in my opinion, Jamarcus Russell could have done better if he not been missed, if he's not wanted to suck on the Raiders. But I hope this year for the Raiders, they can't mess us up. They they had the number one pick, like use it on Jamarcus Russell, and I hope they don't mess that up. For the Giants, the best draft besides trading for Eli Manning, I'm going to say the best draft pick will have to be Odell Beckham Jr. Odell Beckham Jr. from LSU. LSU is a gold mine of receivers. 2018, Saquon Barkley from Penn State. 2024, Malik Neighbors, LSU. Abdul Carter, Penn State. And Jackson Dart, Ole Miss. But to steal the draft, you could think of a few steal the drafts. You think of Brock Purdy. He became Mr. Irrelevant to leading them to a Super Bowl. Cam Scottaboo. Cam Scottaboo was another player that nobody did mention. If you see that game with Arizona State, with the Sun Devils versus Texas, he carried that team on his back with Jordan Tyson. And I think, in my opinion, Cam Scottaboo was the steal of the draft of last year. Have you seen his numbers before he got hurt, Nikki? He's been and he even terrorized your team too. Don't forget that. Besides Dart playing his best and Cam Scottaboo did amazing, I think the defense at the end really came up.
And if I'm going to go with some of the best draft picks the Eagles have had in more the past 30 years, obviously McNabb, which at the time they went against the fans' popular opinion by taking McNabb over Ricky Williams, but that worked out better in the long term. Another one you look at, most know 2008, Deshaun Jackson out of Cal. He ended up being that deep threat receiver the Eagles hadn't really had, that they had passed on in the past. Like I said in 2001 with Freddie Mitchell, who was solid, but there was 2 other star receivers they passed on. But I'd say Lane Johnson 2013 because of the long-term impact he had on the Eagles. It wasn't the flashiest pick at the time, but when you look at how impactful he's been throughout the years, the leader of the offensive line, huge success. Hell, even Jason Kelce in 2011 in hindsight because of the long-term impact. Devontae Smith in 2021. He's been, to me, the best number 2 receiver in the NFL right now. And even the A.J. Brown trade, because make no mistake, if you don't make that trade, you don't enter championship contention. So that was still an important piece of their last 3 of their last 4 seasons.
I think, to be honest with you, I still miss Jason Kelce till this day because Jason Kelce, despite the fact that he was on the Eagles, was by far the best offensive lineman player on the Eagles. I honestly feel sorry. I honestly feel sorry for Jason Kelce on that Tampa Bay game because I wanted him to go out as a champion.
Yeah, that was the worst way to end. And another thing with that A.J. Brown trade, I was going to say, if they didn't make that move, they would have had to settle for Treylon Burks, and that wouldn't have worked out in terms of making them contenders. So in that regard, it worked. Now, there are some I think of in terms of worst draft picks. I mean, if you wanted to go first, you can.
For the worst draft pick, I'm going to say the worst draft pick for organizational-wise, the New York Giants with Kadarius Toney. That was by far the biggest mistake they've ever made in terms of Dave Gettleman's drafting. His draft with Dave Gettleman's drafting was hit and misses. Aside from Saquon Barkley, and letting Odell Beckham Jr. walk to the Browns, I still won't forgive Dave Gettleman for doing that. But Kadarius Toney, in my opinion, is the worst draft pick I've ever seen. Now, if you want to talk about biggest bust for quarterbacks, I'm going to say the biggest bust of the 2020s is not Zach, is not Mac Jones. I'm going to say Zach Wilson. Zach Wilson was by far the biggest bust.
And I'll say some of the worst for the Eagles. Well, I mean, I'm not gonna. I would say Jalen Rager, but I would put him as a dishonorable mention because they realized quickly they made a mistake and let him go and got some compensation. But some other bad ones. Marcus Smith, who I believe was a safety, he was absolutely terrible in the mid 2010s and ultimately was let go, having accomplished absolutely nothing with them. JJ Arcega-Whiteside, who they took when they needed someone else long term, or even worse, that drift, Andre Dillard, the offensive tackle, who mounted to nothing at a time the Eagles needed some help on that O line when all they really had was Kelsey and Johnson. They needed some help to upgrade it, and they went with Andre Dillard, who terrible. Now, fortunately, they got rid of him. They made up for it years later, getting guys like Landon Dickerson, even acquiring Fred Johnson. But Andre Dillard was the worst offensive line draft pick in recent years for the Eagles.
Whenever I think of whenever I think of great memories when it comes to New York and Philadelphia, I think of the Flyers and Rangers. I think of the Nets and the Sixers, the Knicks and Sixers. I think of the Mets and Phillies, but not that way. You see that background behind me? Ye-
2009.
Yep, the 2009 World Series with the Yankees and Phillies. That was by far that was by far the best run the Yankees ever had. And since then, the Yankees has been made to multiple ALCS appearance, only one World Series appearance last year, which by the way, I'm wearing this hoodie, by the way, the World Series 2024, because I worked at the World Series that year against the Dodgers and we lost 5 games. But I think, in my opinion, when it comes to the Phillies and the Yankees, I see this as a better rivalry than the Mets and Phillies. Yes, you could say the Phillies got knocked out because of the Mets, but ultimately for the Yankees and Phillies, that was by far the best one. And it only took us 6 games to beat the Phillies, ultimately letting Hideki Matsui to win the World Series MVP. And I'm going to say till this day, with Bryce Harper now on the team, Aaron Judge now on the team, there's no excuse. You're running it back with Alec Baum and Nick Castellanos cast it off to San Diego. Make this make this move right and make sure you win the NL East big time and don't make no mistake.
I mean, hey, man, Philly and New York, it's always going to have that special buzz to it because it's a shorter commute compared to Philly and Boston, Philly, Washington, New York, Boston, New York, Washington, or so on and so forth. And it's between big market cities. So it's
New
easy
York, Los
for,
Angeles, right? New York,
right.
Los Angeles, Boston, New York, Chicago, Green Bay, Chicago, New York. I can name every city in this country that has a big marketing rivalries.
Yep, absolutely. So that's that special factor right there that makes it such a big market rivalry. Kind of trying to think, are there any out on the West USA, like city wise? It's kind
San
of,
Diego, San Diego, San Francisco, San Diego, San Francisco, San Francisco, Seattle, San Francisco, Los Angeles.
and yet you have that's, that's one of those that applies across different sports. But like the one main one with the four major sports is Philly and New York, because there's at least one rivalry in all four major sports. Eagles, Giants, Flyers, Rangers, Sixers, Knicks, or Sixers, Nets, then Phillies, Mets. I mean, there's at least one Philly, New York in all those sports.
And you forgot the Yankees and Phillies in that 2009 World Series. They still played in the interleague though, but not by a long shot. But I think, in my opinion, the Yankees and Phillies was by far the most memorable one because Not because we beat you guys in 6 games, not because you have Pedro Martinez, not because you have Ryan Howard, not because you have Henry Rollins or anyone. Sorry, not Henry Rollins.
Jimmy
Ryan
Rollins.
Howard. Thank you, Jimmy Rollins. Not because you have Jimmy Rollins, not because you have Ryan Howard, not because you have Pedro Martinez or any great players. It's because your team was by far the best back-to-back National League champions from 2008 and 2009.
You know, in terms of most watched, I'm sure most likely that World Series was, because that's like the only time out of the major sports we've seen them in the championship round, because Eagles and Jets have never crossed paths in the Super Bowl, and the other ones, it's all same conference. Like Phillies Mets is more
Exactly.
common, but Phillies Yankees was probably the bigger draw.
Exactly. The Jets are the only team that beat you guys sometimes. Let's not forget about that. The Jets and Eagles could have a slightly rivalry, but not by a long shot. But I'm going to say that in terms of right in terms of best moments, I'm going to say the best moments is the Giants and Eagles. Not the second game, but the first game was by far the most surprising one this year. Ladies and gentlemen, I think we have that time for episode 2. Tune in next week for episode 3 of Everything on the Table. Until then, ladies and gentlemen, thank you all for the birthday wishes. And until next time, goodbye, my friends.
And for Nikki Steez and Agent Warrior X, we're signing off. Have a great night. We'll catch you next week.
Have a good night, everyone.